Welcome to Dilki Recipes on your favorite social media platform. Hi, I'm Dr. Sheeza Mohsin, executive coach, relationship expert, and your coach in this virtual space to support you and your Desi family in America. If you identify as being a person of color, a minority, and having some form of bicultural identity, a major goal of putting this information out is to help you realize you're not alone in this journey. If you identify as a Desi with cultural roots in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and surrounding areas, trying to meet your life and relationship needs and desires while embracing some beautiful elements of your cultural heritage, Dilki Recipes is for you. If you don't identify as a Desi, but have a warm, loving, human being kind of disposition and you want to better yourself, I think you'll find some good stuff in here as well. So let's go on with the show. Hello and welcome. I am so excited about today's episode and especially about the person who is my guest today. Maryam, welcome to Dilki Recipes podcast.
Thank you, Sheeza. I'm so honored to be here.
My goodness, Maryam. So I'm going to brag about you a little bit. Maryam is a licensed professional counselor. She has her own private practice and you work, Maryam, so well with South Asian women of color, navigating identity, intergenerational stuff, attachment. And I know that you're also doing a lot of work around cultural expectations, trauma, which I am so excited about because I'm always looking to refer, and you're one of my favorite referrals that I sent. You are now EMDR trained, which is something very close to my heart, and I do that work as well. You are also very, very culturally tuned in. So a lot of times when I look at therapists that are growing in the space, I love seeing professionals who have malleability, who understand both ends of the spectrum. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. But I love that you show up really well and authentically for your clients. And so when I was thinking of having this discussion about the importance of, case consultation, collaboration, and the work in the space that's growing in our professional arena, you were the first name that came to mind.
So sweet. Oh my God, itni tareef. So sweet. Sheeza, I'm so excited to be here. And I think the first time that before I even met you, when I heard about you, was when I was in my own therapy and I was looking for therapists. And so you were on the list of referrals, Sheeza Mohsin. And little did I know that I'd become a therapist. I would get to connect with you, and now we're colleagues, we're friends,
Absolutely.
we get to do all of it together. And so I really genuinely look up to you so much. You're such a mentor in this field, and that's why I'm so excited that this podcast that you do, the support that you really want to give to other people is so needed because there's not as many of us. It's growing, but we need a lot of direction, and there's a lot of specific aspects of being a therapist when we bring in the intersection of culture and religion and communities, that there is a way to handle it, right? We don't want to wing it all. I think we've winged our life enough being children of immigrants.
It warms my heart when I hear this, but I will tell you, this is something that I know we know, but I want to say it out loud because you may not know how much I learned from you. And it's two-way. It is so important for that exchange to happen. I love how you have that culturally informed space, which I actually don't see as much. So it's right back at you. And I'm so, so, so glad that we're talking about this topic. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of kick us off to the idea of understanding all these generations, understanding our work and how everybody is experiencing therapy. And because our conversation will become deep. So I want to put a disclaimer out that this is just education. This is not therapy. This is not legal advice. This is not professional advice. This is two professionals talking to each other about their experiences, kind of being each other's sounding board in that space, and also pointing out some of the challenges that hopefully our listeners will be able to relate to. Tell me about your perspective on how you're seeing the therapeutic space growing. What do you notice in terms of all the generations?
To start with, even the perspective from the clinician side, right? Even as I started my therapy journey as a fully licensed counselor, it's been 4 years, but when I was in my master's program, right, it was like 2018, a little bit before COVID. And so, I had met individuals who were going into the space, but there wasn't a very collective community. And so what I see now is there are so many of us, but kind of there for our own reasons. They're individually seeking out support, right? Where we want to We want to show up in these consultations where we can actually see people who look like us, right? Who are South Asian, maybe Muslim, maybe, even just a woman of color, right? Not asking for much. That space growing, there's so many of us, but there's still some gaps with how we're connecting with each other. One, maybe because there are a lot of groups, right? But I think accessibility to the group, or like really honing in on like the niche, right? Like I think even from a therapeutic perspective, we talk about that, where it's like identifying your niche is so important, because you can't be everything for everyone. So same for us, right? As therapists, like we also need something very specific. So I noticed that from the clinician side, but also client side, right? Like how the therapy space is growing. I love how everyone talks about therapy now, on TikTok,
No.
yes, TikTok has like its downfalls, what doesn't, but like there's so much conversation around mental health, right? And like people starting to recognize a lot of the just even terminology. Yes, it can become a little therapy speak at times, but I think it's just the natural ebbs and flows when people finally understand something or get to talk about something that's been shut down for so long. So I'm seeing all the like millennials definitely millennials in therapy, right? Having like faced so much of what they did in isolation, right? Where it's like, don't ask, don't tell, keep the mask. We've got Gen X who are like before that, where they're really like, we focus on discipline, we focus on like what we got to do. The boomers who are like duty, right? Like that wasn't even an option. And then I love Gen X. I will always talk about, or not Gen X, sorry, Gen Z. I will always talk about Gen Z, right? They're just so cool, right? And like
Yes.
the values they've also come into, like they've come into such a different world from us. We had privacy at one point and then we lost privacy. They never had privacy to begin with. So that is kind of their normal in a way. And I don't necessarily see that as a negative thing, or I don't think they necessarily only see it as a negative thing. They're the ones who are in therapy the most. And I love that, because they're the ones who aren't afraid to share their experiences and talk about it and like kind of bring forth some of that vulnerability. The more you talk about it, the more you realize this is something that people are finally like ready and feel safe to start having and start sharing with people when they realize other people are doing the same thing.
I'm like, oh my God, I'm learning so much. I'm having meta response to what you're saying. And I just want to validate it because you said it so well. And I also want to just re-emphasize what you said initially, that, we're growing in this space and there's a little bit of chaos is what I heard. And it's so true, because when I look to refer a lot, you can't be doing everything and you can't be everything for everyone. But in the professional field, it's so important. And this is also me talking to all the growing therapists, saying that you have to know the top 3 things you're good at. And I will just share a story about my training when I was going through it. I had to do it twice. Painful, don't ask me why, but there was like double licensure and all of that. But my supervisor, was like, so what do you think I should specialize in? And this is like, 12, 15 years ago. And he started laughing. And he said, you actually think you can choose it? And I just looked at him like, he goes, your clients are going to choose you. And whatever you keep seeing more people for is going to be what you're going to specialize in, because it's going to show you a competence in that area.
Yeah, it's a calling.
It's a calling. And so now it's so clear to me, my calling. So that's beautiful that you said. The other thing I want to just validate, which is so beautiful about the generations, Gen Z is golden. You said it, they've normalized. There's no shame about therapy. That's just like saying, I'm going to go see my personal trainer. And I will tell you, it's very interesting to me because I literally have very diverse practice, because I see baby boomers through Gen Z. But what is so cute in validating what you're saying is that, of course, we maintain confidentiality, which is critical to us, right? So even after somebody refers to me, they're not allowed to ask me whether that person came or not, because I don't answer that. But it's so adorable when I'm in a public setting. My Gen Z, my millennials have no qualms about publicly introducing me as their therapist. Like, oh, here you go. It is mind blowing how they're so comfortable. And I feel that as a Gen Xer, we have so much to learn from that generation, because when you normalize, that means there's no shame about learning, about improving. Not that you're a failure, you're a loser, you actually need help, because Gen X and the late baby boomers have contributed to the stigma around mental health. So tell me what's going on for you.
So I'm a millennial, but I'm at the tail end. I'm a 94 baby, but I have 2 older brothers. And so the eldest one is 7 years older than me. They like put me into like peak like millennial like experience versus like being maybe closer to the Gen Z part of it. And so I get to kind of dabble in both, you know, I like it. I learned my masking survival skills for a reason. So now I have fun with it. I think as a millennial, one, like personally for me, we've been wanting to find a therapist. I always knew that I was struggling with what was happening with my life, right? My identity being split. And I wanted to talk to someone. And I think the need for that was always there because also the part of me that would help people and want to like share and talk and connect. I was like, there's got to be a space for me. It was just so limited. And so I remember there wasn't shame about seeing a therapist. There was a shame in just the struggle, right? I was like not knowing like, are people struggling just as much as I am, right? Like, am I just dramatic, right? Like it was, you know, it was so confusing for me. And so to come into a space now where as being a client, right, I will get to talk to my friends where they're like, oh, you know, like this is something my therapist brought up, right? Or like, oh, and the wise words of my therapist and kind of just referencing it because again, it's just conversation now. But also being a therapist, same thing where it's like, yes, you give the confidentiality spiel where you're like, we are going to be in shared spaces together because it's just different. White therapists, right? They draw those really hard boundaries. There's no overlap whatsoever. They also got more spaces for them than we do. Maybe if we had that, maybe there could be a little bit more separation. But I like that there's not as much separation because it's actually reflecting what's actually going on, right? Is we see each other in these spaces together, but of course we don't go say hello first to protect them. But yes, people coming up being like, this is my therapist. It's really precious because it really does speak to what it means to be a relational therapist. A relationship is everything. And so the genuineness and like the sense of safety and connection and trust that comes with it. You can't just turn that on and off. I like that it can show up in different ways.
It's so beautiful and so profound, and I completely agree because I feel that's what makes a great professional in this space. We know and we're so honorable too, and have so much regard for that relationship, and especially when you work in the relationship space. I want your perspective, Maryam, around the stigma, and I'm going to say something that may seem strange, but the stigma around working with a Desi therapist. So while there are some people who only want to work with a Desi therapist, there are those who will reach out and say, I want a non-Desi person to work with.
Yeah, funny, right? Because I hear, I mean, the latter, right? Where it's like, we only want a Desi therapist, right? And because tired of working with people who don't look like me. But I have so many times received inquiries or referrals where they're asking for someone who isn't Desi. And for me, I don't necessarily find that odd. Of course, the therapist brain, you know, that comes in where you're like, well, yeah, you know, there's a lot of trust that's needed in this process, right? And so even though people may want someone that can connect, sometimes we actually want someone that is different in that space because we have our own experiences and issues that have happened with other people who in this space, right, is Desi, who whether they were a therapist or they were maybe an elder figure or mentor, and there was just no sense of security, right? Maybe they would talk about what was going on, confided in someone, and you found out that like the whole community knew about it within a week. I've even heard of like situations, you know, not to call anyone out, where they might see someone and then that person that they'll see like at like a party, they'll be like, hello, you know, how's like, oh, how was it since our last session? And it's like, it's not the space.
There probably was some trust violation. That's one definite one, because a lot of times, and you know, this is also a gentle reminder to therapists in our community that it is so important to hold that responsibly. And I would say that for two reasons. The main one absolutely being the beneficence. You want to make sure you're not being any kind of damage to your client or malfeasance. But I think it's very important for professionals to remember the person it's reflecting most poorly on is that professional. If you cannot protect the confidence and trust of your client who has opened up to you in vulnerability, not only are you doing disservice to your own reputation, you're kind of doing a disservice to our profession.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're literally reopening a wound that they're coming
To you for.
coming to you for, right? And so I think that's a really important aspect. I think also another aspect outside of just trust is working with a Desi therapist can also like serve as like a mirror for you too, right? It can really get uncomfortable because it's like I'm talking about these things to someone who's part of the community, the experience, and there's a lot of exposure, right? Like it's not even that like I don't trust who you're going to tell. It's like I don't know if I can trust myself to like share something so vulnerably, especially with women wanting to talk about sex with a therapist who might be older, right? Or like I'll see it a lot where I have tons of great colleagues who wear hijab and they're like, yeah, my, some maybe new clients are going to come in and they think that I might be very conservative because I'm wearing a hijab, and then I'll drop the F-bomb, right? Because it's like, I'm still cool. There's a lot of preconceived notions that come in, and that's understandable. Sometimes to get to a Desi therapist, some people need to find other therapists first before they find someone that's going to maybe hit home on some of those deeper stuff.
There's a lot of biases and stereotypes going, and when I've done supervision, group supervision, I have gotten to hear that from a couple of therapists who wear hijab. Then they're talking about, a situation where with somebody's sexuality or relationship and so forth, and then shared that the client was in shock because they thought that they would get shamed, they would get judged for being in that space, and the therapist was like, well, that's not my journey, this is you, this is all about you. And I tell my clients all the time, because I don't wear hijab, but I have a lot of clients who do that, in this room right now, the only values and principles I have to honor are yours. This room doesn't function with my rules, values, and so forth. And another reason that I have noticed, and I think that Gen X and baby boomers do that more, it is that fear of their privacy being violated, because they feel that somebody far, far away, in every which way, in looks, in association to my community, I can probably start with being brave. And I like what you said, that that's probably step one. And once they feel comfortable, they come closer to working with somebody who actually understands their culture and who never has to explain everything. So it's so interesting, because I used to wonder that in my practice historically, and even today, I have the pleasure and honor of working with a lot of religious leadership and clergy in all faiths. Initially, I was like, I don't know if I'm good enough. And I'm wondering if it is because I may be good, because, initially you're not as confident in your work, or is it because I'm so far removed from that community or from that church or from that synagogue that, it's so much safer for this person to talk to me than it would be for them to talk to somebody in there. So there's a privacy element, definitely.
Again, across the generations, right? The maybe even though the core issues, right, they all like overlap, because obviously they also transfer over. The way that the generation has had to kind of function and integrate into society has evolved from generation to generation. So like we were saying, that with boomers, so much around the values was around like duty. Yes, like your reputation and like what you're like kind of like building. And so there was a lot of isolation that had to happen in that, because no one can kind of see through anything else, right? What's happening behind the closed doors. I think Gen X, there's a lot of responsibility for Gen X to carry that forward. But then they really honed in on the discipline aspect of it, right? Of just like working hard, some of that like loyalty that was there, but like with boomers, but like I think kind of like pushing it a little bit more to kind of notice their own skill sets that they have to bring. And then millennials, like things just started shifting, right? A little bit more work-life balance, like, just some of the things that we were going through as millennials, that also changed because we started really like questioning like our identity, right? Who are we? Like, how does this fit into everything? And we started having to kind of like push back. But in some ways, we also had to still really keep the peace, which is why a lot of millennials will often talk about people pleasing struggles and some of that perfectionism, and how that doesn't like tie into like maybe actually the values that they do have. And then of course we got a Gen Z. And so I love being able to analyze the different generations. We're all wanting to go for the same reasons, right? But our barriers look a little different.
That's so true, Maryam. And I love how you said that we're all also wanting similar things, but the barriers absolutely generationally look different. And so I want to open up the space, because we're talking about the importance of consultation. We're talking about the generational differences as we approach our work and offer support to someone. And then we're talking about relationships and also supporting relationships in different generations. So
Yeah.
tell me what comes up for you and what you notice, especially in relational work, in terms of serving the generations, what's different and what is maybe challenging.
Yeah, I mean, as part of the case consultation, right? I mean, the reason we have that, the reason that is so important for that to be accessible, especially from these frameworks that we work with and the identities that we work with, right, is that when you do a case consultation, you're really trying to conceptualize a client for the whole experience as a person, right? They're not just their diagnosis. I think that's something that we're really getting better about. It's becoming less only clinical and becoming a little bit more humanistic, where it's like we really need to treat the person as a whole. And case conceptualization allows for looking at all those frameworks. So as a relational therapist, a framework that's really important to be able to understand is, one, like differing values, right? What are the values of each generation? What is it that each generation values? And obviously, like, your client may or may not fit in some of those values. If you can have an understanding for where they grew up, how they grew up, if we're working with, someone who is in their late 60s and wanting to understand if they are an immigrant, like what is their story, right? And if when they immigrated here, what was it like for them to have to give up things, right? What was it like to kind of live in that survival of really just focusing on making it, really focusing on the finances, like that lower level of Maslow's hierarchy? I think we often forget that that hierarchy is there for a reason, because you can't do any of the top stuff if not the bottom, right? Even as a
Abs-
millennial, there's times where I was like, I get it, but I was a brat where I was like, what about my autonomy and my identity? And I'm like, I would not have been even able to explore that if the other stuff was not done for me.
Absolutely. When I do intergenerational work, you've just described, some of the families I work with where the grandparents are boomers. The couple is a combination of a Gen Xer, as an example, who immigrated, one partner. The other partner is like an older millennial
Mm,
who was born and raised here.
yeah.
And now they have Gen Z kids. So it's like 4, 5 different generations in the household. And boy, is it a party. It's very difficult and challenging. And so knowing your stuff is so important because you have to modify the messaging and the narrative to get through to each generation.
And then also trusting that, your clients, like if you're really tuned in, your clients are gonna really speak or directly or indirectly to the values, right? What they care about. And so rather than just seeing the conflict at hand, it makes sense that they're having a difficult time reaching each other when all their perspectives are rooted in something else, right? Something different that they value. That's where, again, back to the framework. If you can understand the values, but then you can also understand maybe like each generation's like core fears as well, and some of these like maybe unsaid messages that like drive the reasons why they do things, whether it's like looking at like things are scarce, right? If there's a sense of scarcity, the way
Yes.
I operate out of scarcity, understandably, because things were quite literally scarce, what is that going to look like versus someone who maybe that scarcity is not there anymore, but they're still operating out of scarcity, but in more of an emotional aspect, right? And so it helps bridge people together, right? That we are all working towards the same thing, just different pathways.
And that's why I think our work is so important. It's so, so important to tune in to those relational dynamics, especially in family of origin and parent child, in marriages. All
Yeah.
of those things become really important. I want to open up the space to talk about some of the difficult relational work. I'm wondering what's piqued your curiosity. What are some of the things that you think it would be good for us to talk about and bring to the attention of our audience that's listening?
A really big one as part of doing relational work, right, is also as a therapist, like bringing yourself into session, right? Which from a clinical perspective, that's in the past has been a big no-no, like no self-disclosure. Don't share anything about yourself. And it's totally client-centered. And I've gotten feedback from a lot of individuals who've been in therapy where it was like, I know nothing about my therapist, that it's almost like it creates that hierarchy, right? That somehow the therapist is like the expert or a leader or like a teacher, right? And there's elements where you will teach, and there's, like I'll tell my clients where I'm like, hey, I am, first of all, I'll never be an expert, but I'm always practicing, right? Because there's always something to learn. But, there are things that I'm quite well versed in just from like a conceptual perspective, right? But at the end of the day, you are the expert in this room. You are the expert of your own life. If we don't bring ourselves as therapists, right, which in self-disclosure, do it on your own way, right? It's first of all asking yourself the question, is this for me or is this for the client? Because everything we want to do is to be kind of a mutual benefit to the relationship, because that is what a relationship is. Relationships are not one-sided, right? And even in therapy, even though it can even seem one-sided because we're focused on the client, you're still creating that relationship dynamic between you two. And so for therapists to really actually bring some authenticity to session, right? Around maybe some of their experiences. You don't have to go in and tell full details, but how you can relate to some of the experiences, because it's like you're giving each other feedback in real time. And I find that that's so powerful. And it's something that is really underutilized, maybe because people don't really know how to do it, or they're scared to take that risk of sharing too much.
It's such a good point, Mariam, and I will tell you, I remember earlier on in my work, that was something I was not very comfortable with. And then over time, I learned that healthy, measured, and intentional sharing is so powerful for joining with your client. It automatically dilutes the hierarchy and that power dynamic, which might assert that, oh, we're so perfect and great. Because when we show up imperfect, then we are opening up the space for vulnerability.
I'll give my clients these disclaimers pretty early on where I'm like, spoiler alert, there is no destination, right? There is no place to reach. Yes, the work keeps going, but it's in the sense that, like, because that's your life just keeps going, right? And so when they can see that and they can see that it really is about just like learning to be in relationship, right? Learning how to like do relationship and learning what it looks like to like have these shared experiences of like your own life and someone else's when you're together. It makes for something so powerful because that's just what we yearn for as humans.
Absolutely. So, to everybody listening who's a professional, and to everyone listening who's considering therapy, to know that your therapist is not an expert and they're not perfect. For therapists who are struggling to share appropriately with their clients, it's a very powerful tool to help create safety in the room, because then there's joining and sharing instead of coming from that superior position. Maryam, any question that stands out for you before we wrap up that we would like people to know about working with a South Asian therapist, or we would like therapists to know about being better, stronger, great at what they do that will be helpful?
Yeah, Sheeza, something that I have questioned a lot in my work as well. And this is where when I look to mentorship, what advice would you give when you're trying to navigate like one, even what we had discussed earlier, when there's so many things you want to be able to cover and discuss? There's all sorts of clients. Yes, like to be honest, even just South Asian clientele is such a specific demographic, but it's still so broad. How would you advise those wanting to, even start working with this population and what things to maybe look out for?
I love that question. It's a fantastic question. There are very, very important things to consider when you're doing that, especially when you're new in your space and learning about yourself. So, two things that I will definitely say is be mindful of when you feel very fulfilled after a session. So many times there are some clients you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that I get paid to work with this person. How amazing is that? Yes, they are amazing, but it also means that you have a certain level of competence in that work so it doesn't feel so heavy.
Right.
So those are the ones and profiles that you want to pay attention to because you want more of that. You're obviously good at it. There's a rapport, there's a chemistry. So knowing what comes very easy to you. Yes, there are lots of great clients, but there's some work you will find coming very easy to you. Staying tuned to that is so important because that's how you build competence, knowing that strength. The other is the self of therapist. When is it feeling heavy and how much of that is my work that I have to do? That's really important to notice. And do I have to stop working and then do that work? Absolutely not. You just don't want to delve in that space. So there were one or two topics that I noticed that as I was working there, I was consciously competent, but it was triggering me into a lot of spaces that I didn't want to activate in my head as I was trying to be present for my client. With the results that I really limited taking clients and I would refer out. Why is referring out so important? Because eventually it impacts your credibility and your reputation. So when you notice your weakness and you refer out, you're actually protecting your reputation. So I will say be proactive. Don't go for the short term gain of just having a client for a few sessions. It's not good for them and it's not good for you.
Absolutely. And I think again, like some of that can also get back mixed into like again the scarcity mentality, right? Where it's like I want to help everyone, right? Or I don't know how to say no to every client and like I really want to show up for them, right? But I mean that's where your gut also comes into. I think that's why those consultation calls are so important because both the therapist and the potential client are assessing if they're going to be a good fit for each other, right? And that's why one, I mean, that's going to be on the therapist, right? To really assess for that, where it's like what this potential client is bringing, what things that they might be discussing, or you might not know that maybe until the first few sessions, right? That's fine. But once you start to recognize that there might be some things outside your scope, right? And that doesn't mean you're not competent. It doesn't mean that you are failing them, right? You're stupid. Like, again, as we said earlier, we cannot be everything, and people also don't want us to be everything, right? I think also from a like an aura perspective, you would rather trust someone who can do one thing really well than do like 15 things like, all right. I think that's also part of the culture that a lot of us grew up in, with hustle culture, where it was like, okay, have all my resume stacked and this and this and this. And it's like, you get so lost in the essence of it. And, when you can't really focus on that one thing and really like hone in on it, you're going to get very scattered as a clinician. I really can relate to that and that experience that I had as I was learning about what my own niche is. But then, two, the clients itself, it ends up being a really big disservice to them, because there might be some key elements that if you're not equipped on, like if you're working with a neurodivergent individual, that's really important training, that there's people who do it well, right? They know this is how like the mental process is, this is how you're supposed to kind of do the framework. Trauma, right? Where it's like, we all hear the word, but like to really get trained in trauma and understanding, hey, doing work too fast is actually going to trigger the client and open up wounds and actually do them harm. I need to be aware of that, because it's such delicate work. It actually makes for a very good therapist who can say, I don't know if I'm equipped for this, I need to refer out.
That happens a lot, and it's also risking the client's belief and trust in the process of therapy. Because when incompetence meets a therapist and client in that space, the outcomes are not very good. So if you can disclaim that, and being neurodivergent, very good example, because when I'm referring out, a lot of times initially I would have clients almost get offended that, well, why wouldn't you work with my family member? And I'm like, it would be an honor to work with them. However, you have to know that you're buying mid and low grade level competence, because I am not trained in that. And you don't understand it. And you may not think there's a difference, but I know it. And so I cannot ignore that. And it's so important. Same goes for working in marriage, working with divorced families, especially newly divorced, working with high conflict or specialized relational issues. It is such a big responsibility to refer out and know your limitations, because it has dire consequences. Or especially when you don't have training and expertise. And even if you're new and trying to grow in that practice, if you are not consulting and checking in what you are doing with an expert, then you are making that family very vulnerable.
Yeah. It's also just not going to be efficient long term, right? Like if you're wanting, as a therapist, you want to grow your practice, or you're like really wanting to like hone in on these skills, it's going to actually make your job a lot easier if you stick to what you know and like find great referrals and people to refer out to, and building those connections, because you'll be known for some things, other people will be known for that thing. It creates a little bit of a better separation, which again, clients won't know that. Clients don't know, right? They're trying to reach out to whoever like kind of makes sense to them. So they don't know, I need to work with a trauma specialist, I need to do attachment wound work. Like that's not for them to know. That's really our job. And so I think these conversations are really important, and I hope helpful for, new or prospective clinicians, because it's not meant to scare you, right? It's just the reality of it. Hey, yes, we work in a field that, because it's so relational, maybe some of it can seem a bit abstract, but actually like we can really, if we really hone in on what's going on, you can actually separate out what specialties there are.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited that we got to talk about this, Maryam, because for completely selfish interests, I'm so excited to build this group, because I need to make a good referral to say, you know what, Maryam is the trauma expert, or, so and so is the perfect person to work with teenagers, because then I know that I am sharing some of what I have built in terms of trust with this person, and we're able to very intelligently refer to each other. So everyone is not doing everything. It's like, okay, I'll take this person, yes, in the absence of expertise, where somebody gets to at least talk to them. And I want to validate what you said, those case consultations in relational therapy are so important. And also 4 to 6 weeks later, when you actually, it's like a committed relationship. You have great intentions, but you don't know how it's going to be till you're in it. So in 4 to 6 sessions, okay, maybe I'm not able to help them. Maybe, I'll do consultations all the time where I'm talking to a therapist or a coach, and they're like, Sheeza, I don't think they're a good fit for me. I am getting, and sometimes it's a learning curve, and sometimes they're right. It isn't a good fit. Therapy and the therapeutic process, not just for the client to feel good, you also have to feel good about your experience instead of going, oh my God, I'm dreading this session. Why
Yeah.
do I have to? It's telling a lot.
I can't speak for everyone, but I know that when I was a new therapist, and even now, right, like 4 or 5 years later, there's still just so much to learn. And sometimes what can happen as well is that I may feel some embarrassment or some like shame, right? Or around like asking certain questions that I'm still like having a hard time understanding and thinking that maybe I need to know that, right? And so for a place to have like to do case conceptualizations where it's relational, it's authentic, where it's like you bring in what it is that you really want to focus on. It gives people a chance to, I think, really genuinely be lifelong learners, right? Whether you're an associate, LPC associate, right? You just started, you're an intern, whatever, you're a fully seasoned licensed therapist, like there's always something to learn from, right? And so I think being in that space as a learner for me would definitely just like allow me to know that I can't do this without other people.
I can't tell you, Maryam, how many times I walk away thinking, I wonder if they got more out of it or I did. Because every time I have that interaction, even if I'm mentoring, I end up learning so much. Because,
Yeah.
another human being who's a professional has such a great perspective. And I'm like, wow, I didn't think about it this way. I was not looking at it this way. It just grows that. And our spaces are also, especially those of us with established successful practices, it becomes isolating.
Yeah,
So,
so
so it is so, so important. So, Maria, my last question to you, and then we'll wrap up, is what good vibes do you want to send out to everyone listening about therapy, about the importance of working with a culturally competent professional who can really support you in your journey, and anything else wonderful that you want to share?
yes. Oh, good vibes. I mean, always good vibes. But this question's come up for me, like personally, and then also just even in professional spaces where it's like, what is the point of therapy? Why do we do this work? What if there's no destination? What is it that we're like working towards, right? And what I can really say to that is therapy allows you to one be in relationship to yourself whatever comes up, right? You're still going to have grief, you're still going to have the conflict and the issues and all of that stuff. When you can de-identify from it, it's just a part of you, it's not your whole experience. You really reclaim back a sense of self. And I think as just our Desi culture, right? I mean, every culture has this experience, but forgetting to focus on just us, we've really had to learn to forego authenticity and our sense of self and identity for the sake of attachment. And so we do a great job having community and connections, right? But sometimes that community is really based off of like so much that we've lost for ourselves, and there's so much grief in that. And so when we grieve that together, when we experience that together, right, we also get to like reclaim ourselves together, and then you get to like get back in connection with people in a relationship. So I guess the good vibes I would give for that is go find yourself, right? Like you get to go find yourself.
I love it. This was so great, Mariam. Thank you so much for talking with me. I
Thank
will
you,
definitely
Sheeza.
have you over again because we need to continue talking about the importance, especially when it comes to relational therapy, the importance of growing this space so we can be there and more supportive of our clients' relationship challenges.
Absolutely.
All right, stay tuned, everyone, and thanks so, so much for joining.
Please remember to keep listening and watching as part of your weekly self-care and learning ritual. You know there are lots of commonalities in our lives, relationships, in our joys and struggles. And my hope is that this material will help you expand your perspective, give you some clarity on how to think about things, and ultimately make you feel better and sorted about your life and relationships. Hope you have a fulfilling and wholesome day.